Hari Om. My name is Swami Asokananda. I'm here today to present an introduction to the yogic scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. I'm from New York City, so it's very rare that I get to see the stars at night. But imagine a time before smartphones, before laptops, before television, before radio, even before books. Imagine people looking up at the sky. They didn't have any of these distractions, and the awe they must felt of this vast, vast creation. And I think that people, besides having awe, some people went very deep to try to understand the mysteries of this universe. And they found that it was not so much by thinking about them, but by stilling the mind that they made deep discoveries. And the unique thing about India, I think these people who had these realizations were all over the world, but in India, they made it a priority that if you gained this type of realization, you had a responsibility to pass it on to at least one other person. So this role of discipleship was very important in the Indian culture. So it kept getting passed on and on and on. And in the beginning, it was passed on through word of mouth. It was called the Shrutis, that which is heard. Not only because there weren't books yet, but also because the power of that realization could be conveyed through the presence of someone who was experiencing it. At some point, people started writing down what they were learning. Maybe they took tree bark and they wrote down what they were learning. They just realized that, one, they may not remember it, and two, it should be passed on to others. And over many generations, hundreds and hundreds of years, these writings took place, and someone collected them all, and they became known as the Vedas. And in North India, in the Indus Valley, there was a culture around these teachings. And the teachings were called Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal truth. When the British came, they called it, since it was the Indus Valley, they called them the Hindus. And then the Hindu religion was born. But Hinduism is a unique form of religion. It's so broad-minded that you could believe that God had no form. God is an all-pervading consciousness, a higher intelligence, a spirit. You could believe that God had a form, and you could choose whatever form you want. That's called Ishtadevata. According to your temperament, you choose a form of God, and God will come in that form. Or you don't have to believe in God. No one's proved it. How do you know there's a God? Atheists had a place in Sanatana Dharma. So you won't find another religion, I don't think, this broad-minded. And the Vedas dealt with all aspects of life. And the first part is focused on how can I lead a daily life that will ensure me going to a higher place, we can call it heaven, some astral realm where I can enjoy life more than on this earthly plane. And the second part of the Vedas, the last part of the Vedas, deals with the purpose of life. So the purpose of life is not to go to heaven. Certainly we want to avoid getting to hell. They're both temporary states. And there are yogis who would say they're both a part of the dream, a part of the illusion of Maya. And we stay there as long as our karmas are activated. And then we come back and we have a chance to move in toward the purpose of our life. This last section could be called either Vedanta. Vedanta would be the end of the Vedas, or Vedanta, without teeth, the end of our life. It's probably not a good idea to think of studying Vedanta toward the end of our life when it's too late to enjoy life. Our life force is weakened, and we don't have the energy really to Vedanta properly. And this last section of the Vedas, the Vedanta, is a compilation of these books called the Upanishads, and it's summarized in the Vedanta Sutras. Vedanta Sutras is a very direct, you can say dry form of the truth. If you ever have insomnia, you can keep it on your nightstand, you can pick it up, and you'll start to doze off. It's too dry and direct. Plus, the ego doesn't want to have to understand these truths about its non-existence. So you'll tend to want to fall asleep. Joseph Campbell understood that these truths could be better absorbed by the normal person through stories, what he called archetypal myths. And most cultures have some archetypal myths that, in a way, define the culture. And he said, a good archetypal myth is a hero's journey. Some complacent being is put through some adversity and has to dig deep and find the strength to face these challenges and comes out a wiser, better person. George Lucas studied with Joseph Campbell. He understood this, and that's how Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars went on this hero's journey. More in my generation, we see John Anderson in The Matrix goes through the hero's journey and comes out as Neo, the one. But the wise people guiding the Sanatana Dharma understood this importance of storytelling, and it's called the Puranas, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. Basically, they understood what Joseph Campbell said, that there's an outer form of the story that intrigues the mind, a thriller, some sex, drama, intrigue. The mind gets captivated by it. And then there's the inner part of the story that's guiding the soul that's in a clouded state, how to operate in this world. And out of these hundreds of Puranas, there's two major ones. One is the Ramayana, about Lord Rama, and the other is Mahabharata, that focuses on Lord Krishna. Mahabharata is the longest poem ever written, over 100,000 verses. And somewhere in the middle of that huge poem are 700 verses called the Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of God. And it's the essence of all these stories of the Mahabharata, and it's the essence of the Vedic tradition, the Sanatana Dharma. I'm going to go through a few of the stories that lead up to the beginning of the Gita. I think it'll help us to understand the Gita better. It'll give us some of the external part of the story, the exoteric part, and then we'll look at what the deeper meaning is, the hero's journey. So the Mahabharata is attributed to this sage Vyasa. And Vyasa also puts himself in the story of the Mahabharata. It's an author's technique we see sometimes. Kurt Vonnegut did that. So Vyasa puts himself in the story. It was a king his kingdom was attacked, and he felt he needed to lead his army into war. And his minister said, no, you shouldn't really be out there. You don't have no children. There's no one to take over the kingdom if you pass away. He said, no, a king has to be in the forefront of the army. And the king did die in the battle, and there was no heir for the throne. So the ministers found there was some, I think, fine print in the guidelines of tradition that said, if the queen could have sex with someone above the body consciousness, that child could become the king. I assume if it was a male child, that could become the king. So they looked around trying to find someone who was above body consciousness, and they found in the cave, lo and behold, there was Vyasa. He hadn't bathed in a number of years, hadn't combed his hair or shaved. He hadn't been out in society. And they told him the situation. He said, no, that's not my job. Someone else. You need to find someone else. They said, no, we searched. It has to be you, sir. This is your service to the kingdom. So reluctantly, he came back to the palace. And when he walked in the room, the queen couldn't believe what she saw. She never saw anyone like that before. She was so frightened. And they went into bed, and she closed her eyes so tight. And then 9 months later, the child was born blind. Apparently, she closed her eyes so tight that the child was born blind. It wasn't a great thing to have the king, a blind person. So they went back to Vyasa. They said, could you do it one more time? He said, whoa, okay. That's not going to happen. They said, no, this is your karma yoga. You've been meditating all these decades. Now you have to do some service. So they convinced him to come. They convinced the queen to keep her eyes open this time. But she was still so frightened. And the child was born white. I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe albino. One was born blind. The other was born white. And even though the first child, named Dhritarashtra, was born first, because of his handicap, his brother Pandu became the king. I think Dhritarashtra wasn't happy about the discrimination, but he accepted it. And Pandu ended up having 2 wives. And one day he was out hunting. The kings would hunt to protect the kingdom from dangerous animals. But this time he saw a deer, and he did the unethical thing of shooting his arrow at the deer, and he did kill the deer. But it turns out it wasn't really a deer. It was a husband and wife who were sages, who wanted to enjoy having sex in the animal body. And they were in the process of having sex, and he killed the male on top. So the female, the wife, turned into her human form and said, you killed my husband, now you're going to have to get cursed. So, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Please forgive me. You shouldn't be killing deer. You're going to get cursed now. And the curse was that if you ever have a sexual experience, you also will die. Pandu, the younger brother, who was king, had these 2 wives. And the older brother, the blind king, it wasn't that easy to find a princess who would marry him. But there was one lady, Gandharvi, who told her dad, I'm willing to do that, Dad. It'll be a very good allegiance for our kingdom. But one thing is that I don't want to have any superiority or any advantage over my husband. So she blindfolded herself, and she blindfolded herself for life. She never took it off. Pandu is cursed. At some point, one of his wives tells him a secret that she never had told him before. Pandu was feeling bad. After he was cursed, he decided to give up the throne. He said, being king is so many problems come to me. I think my brother can do a good job. So plus now I should live like a sadhu, like a yogi. I'm going out to the forest and build a hut. The wife said, we'll come with you. He said, no, that's not a good idea. They insisted on it. But after years passed, Pandu felt bad about not having a child, not giving his wives a child. So one of the wives, Kunti, told her about this boon that she had been given by this great yogi. He was doing severe tapas, and she was attending to him. She was maybe 11 or 12 years old. And the time came for her, she had to leave. And he was so grateful for her service. He said, I'm going to give you a boon now. I'm going to teach you some mantras. And they're the mantras of different aspects of nature. And when you repeat the mantra, that aspect of nature will come to you. So a short time after that, she's seeing the sunset. It's so beautiful. She says the mantra for the sun. And the sun comes to her and says, okay, now we have to have a child. What? The yogi never said anything about that. Well, he should have told you that it meant, if you repeat the mantra, it means that we're going to have a child together. So that's what happened. And Kunti, and you see this in different religious traditions, took the child, made a basket, and put it in the river and had it float down the river. That child becomes important in the Mahabharata story. I believe his name was Karna. He had a special mark on his head, and he's the brother that the Pandavas, the other brothers don't know about. She's the only one who knows about this fellow. And he's on the opposite side in the war. I'll explain that shortly. And then the blind king and his wife Gandhari, they're called the Kauravas. And they give birth, I don't know how it worked, this is for family planning. They gave birth to 100 children. So when you see something like that, you know that there's an esoteric meaning to that. You see Gandhari is blindfolded herself. So one day, Pandu, spring day, the birds are chirping, the flowers are blooming, and he can't contain himself. So much time has passed. And he ends up trying to have sex with one of the wives, and the curse still held, and he did die. Or I should say before that, so she told Pandu this secret about her capacity to have children without him having sex. And they ended up having 5 children. Actually, they had 3, and the other wife had 2 children. She gave the mantras to the other wife. They started out with they called the god of righteousness, or Dharma, and he became known as Dharmaputra, the son of Dharma, or Yudhishthira. And then they called Bhima, the wind god, and then the son of Indra became Arjuna, and then these 2 twins the other wife had. So 5 brothers, and they became known as the Pandavas. So when Pandu died from the curse, the The second wife, I think her name was Madhuri, she jumped into the funeral pyre that was burning Pandu to be with him on the other side. Kunti was thinking about it, but before Madhuri died, she said, no, look after the boys. So Kunti decided, why are we living out here in the forest like this? Their uncle is the king. They should be given the proper upbringing. So they went to their uncle, and at first he was really happy to have his nephews there. But over time, it became clear that these were really special beings, and they're outshining all of his 100 kids, especially his first son that was really hard on him and the son, Duryodhana. So Duryodhana began to really hate these fellows. And as they got older, his hatred turned into a murderous rage, and he tried to kill them through different ways, never quite succeeded. They both the cousins studied with this great teacher known as Drona, and what's called a Gurukulam. You live with the teacher during that time. One day Arjuna was out, and he came upon this gathering, and he said, "What's going on?" He says, "Well, this beautiful princess, Draupadi, is being offered in a contest." The king said, her father said that if anyone can string this bow, shoot the arrow, and shoot this little dot way, way far away, they're the right person to marry my daughter. And hardly anyone could string this bow. Those who couldn't shoot the bullseye. Arjuna fairly easily pulled the bow back, shot, hit the bullseye. So he won this beautiful princess, Draupadi. And he comes home and says, "Ma, you'll never believe what happened." She was in another room and said, "Whatever it is, I want you to share it with your brother. He said, I won something, I want you to share it with your brother." "Mama, you don't understand. Don't talk back to me, you selfish fellow. Share everything with your brother." But then when she came out of the room and saw what it was too late. She made that pronouncement, and that's what they did. All 5 brothers were married to Draupadi, and they made some arrangement. Maybe I think a month at a time they would live with her. So in many cases you see a man with a number of wives in this culture, but here's a case where a wife had 5 husbands. The division between the cousins became so difficult that the king said, "Okay, I'm going to give you a separate part of the kingdom. That's your place. Me and my sons will rule this part of the kingdom." But he gave them the most rundown, maybe in New York we'd call it the South Bronx, kind of a slum area. But they gradually built it up to a very thriving kingdom. And that even rankled the other side more. And they were threats. They had developed a powerful kingdom. So the oldest son, Duryodhana, knew that the oldest brother of the Pandavas, Yudhishthira, had a weakness for gambling. He was a great soul. He was a son of Dharma. But it's nice to see in the Mahabharata, all the great people had some weakness, some human part of themselves. And he took risks. He believed in God, he took risks, and that crossed over into enjoying gambling. And Duryodhana knew this and challenged him to a game of dice, which was not unusual for rulers at that time. But even though Duryodhana challenged him, it was his uncle who was going to play the dice game. And the uncle was a great cheat at dice. So when Duryodhana walked in, he was so surprised to see it wasn't, when Yudhishthira walked in, he was surprised to see it wasn't Duryodhana, but he accepted it. And they're playing the dice game. It's in a hall where many people are gathered to watch. And Yudhishthira is winning some, losing some. And then his fate starts turning darker and darker. He starts losing. He loses all his elephants. He loses all his cattle. He loses all his silver, all his gold. And he starts to get into this feverish state. Maybe people who have trouble gambling, they get into that irrational mental state. And Jordan said, well, what else do you have? He lost all his land. He says, well, I'm the oldest brother. Technically, I can bet on I can bet my brothers. It's a crazy thing. One by one, he lost his brothers, and they became slaves to the Kauravas. And in this distraught state, he said, well, I have one more thing. My luck is about to change. He said, I have my wife, Draupadi. He lost that. And to kind of put the icing on the cake of humiliating these Pandavas, Duryodhana, the son of the blind king, said, bring her in. I want to see what's underneath her sari. I want to strip her in public. So one of the brothers starts to pull on the sari. It's like 28 feet of cloth. And after that, she would be naked. So there's the blind king. I think you can see Duryodhana there. There's the 5 brothers. They've lost everything. And it's a beautiful scene where Draupadi she's holding on to her sari and asking Krishna for help. Krishna. And the man is pulling the sari and she's not able to stop him from unraveling it. And then at one point, she just throws up both hands. Krishna, I did my effort. I made my effort. I went as far as I could. Now, whatever happens next is in your hands. Either I'll be humiliated in public, or somehow you'll find a way to save me. And Krishna starts pushing down cloth. And the fellow who's stripping her keeps pulling. He can't come to the end, and he collapses in a bundle of cloth. Draupadi's miracle. And this wakes up the blind king. He sees that something really bad is taking place here. It's one thing to humiliate the brothers, but to treat a woman like this, he saw that it was the degradation of his culture to treat someone, particularly a female, like this. So he calls the 5 brothers and says, I'm sorry for what took place here today. If there's a way you can forgive me, go back with all your property and know that I apologize sincerely for what happened here. So the brothers go back. The oldest son goes to his dad and says, Dad, at this point, is fairly weak-minded man. He's old. Says, I agree that probably I overstepped my bounds here. But we created real enemies. These are strong people, and they will not forget what happened to them, but particularly what happened to their wife. And now they're our enemies. So unless we really destroy them, we're in trouble, Dad. And the dad saw the truth of it. And he said, well, what can we do now? I already let them go. He says, well, call them back. We'll have one more game of dice. He said, why would they come back? Well, Yudhishthira, the oldest brother, he'll do whatever you say. That's just his way. He accepts the way of our culture. You took care of him, and he'll do what you say. So they sent a messenger, and they found them. And the messenger told him, please come back for one more roll of the dice. And all the Draupadi and the four other brothers say, no, we're not going back. First of all, you're the worst gambler we've ever seen. And two, you're being cheated by this uncle. And Yudhishthira said something interesting. He said, yeah, I think you're right. I'm a terrible gambler, and I do think that fellow's cheating. But I think it's our destiny, our karma. Our uncle has called me back. I need to obey him and face whatever karma I have to face. We all have to face. And they accepted it. And they went back. And the terms were that whoever wins this gets the whole kingdom. And the losing side goes into banishment for 12 years into the forest. And then 1 year after those 12 years, they come into the neighboring towns, and if they're not discovered, they can come back, and then we'll split the kingdom evenly in half. So Yudhishthira accepted the terms. Of course, he lost the roll of the dice, and he and his brothers are banished. You see the 5 brothers, the wife, and even their dog comes with them. They're banished. And Yudhishthira was the most sattvic of the brothers, so he enjoyed this life in the forest. The others were more rajasic and also thinking about revenge and how unfair their life has turned out. Somehow they get through these 12 years living in a very simple life in the forest. And then they disperse so they're not discovered for this 13th year. I think Arjuna he dressed as a woman and taught Bharatanatyam dance to this young child. They all had their different ways, and they were almost discovered a few times, but fate saved them, and they made it through that 13th year undiscovered. So they come back, and they want what was agreed on, their half of the kingdom. By now, the blind king is pretty much to the side, and the oldest son, Duryodhana, is running the country. And he says, I changed the terms. We're not going to give you half the kingdom. Yudhishthira says, all right, well, give us a small village each. No, that's also too much. Well, let us each have a home, and we can share our wife together. And that's when Duryodhana said, he took a pin, put it into the ground. See how much space that pin takes up? I'm not even going to give you that much space. Get out. He reneged on the deal. So the Pandavas went to Krishna, one of their relatives, and someone they understood was a great soul. They didn't fully understand who he was, but they saw the greatness of him, and they asked for his guidance. And the 4 brothers were thinking, well, we need to go to war with these guys. Yudhishthira was hesitant. He says, well, was it such a bad life in the forest? They said, that's not the point. This is not how it should unfold. So Krishna agreed to go to the other side, called the Kauravas, and see if he can negotiate anything with them. And they did probably the lowest thing you can do, because you never do it. They tried to kill the messenger. The messenger is someone that you respect. And of course, it's not that easy to kill Krishna. They couldn't kill him. he went back and said, I got to agree. I think these are dastardly people. The wrong thing is taking place here. It's called adharma, the opposite of dharma, adharma. And we have to set this right. And I'm sorry, it means we have to fight. So believe it or not, even after trying to kill Krishna, Duryodhana also wanted Krishna's support. He didn't want Krishna himself support. He wanted his army and his armaments. So there's this beautiful scene in Swami Asokananda's book, Living Gita. He describes this scene where Krishna makes believe he's asleep. And the oldest son of the blind king, Duryodhana, walks in and sees Krishna asleep. And he sees there's a chair by the head of the bed. He sits there. He doesn't want to wake him up. A short time after that, Arjuna walks in, sees Krishna sleeping. He just stands there. He's not going to wake him up. And then Krishna wakes up. He sees Arjuna at the head of the bed, at the bottom of the bed. And says, "Oh, Arjuna, how long have you been here? You should have woke me up." Says, "No, sir. I wouldn't wake you up. What can I do for you?" "Well, you know the situation. I need your help." Of course, you have my help." And then Duryodhana behind said, No. You didn't see me. I was here first. That's not fair. Yeah, that's not totally fair. You were here first. But I already promised Arjuna that I would help him. No, that's not the right thing. I was here first. Well, I just said that I would help Arjuna. I didn't say anything about my army, my arms. So since I already promised Arjuna help, he has to decide he can either take me and I won't fight. I can drive his chariot, but I won't fight. Or he can take my army and armaments. And Arjuna didn't hesitate. He said, No, Krishna, I came for your help. I want you. Duryodhana was so relieved. This stupid fellow, what's he going to do with one person? He got all his arms and armaments. He already had this great superiority in terms of men and arms. And this is like the finishing touch. Just before the battle is about to begin, Vyasa comes back into the story. And he says to the blind king, if you like, I can give you the city of being able to overcome your blindness and see what's taking place in the battlefield. And the blind king, Dhritarashtra, thought about it and said, I haven't seen my whole life. Why do I want to open my eyes and see all this carnage? And also, it seems like the battle is not in question. My sons and their forces have such a superior force. I don't really have a doubt about the outcome. So I think I'll pass on this boon. So, all right, well, how about your minister, Sanjaya? If ever you get curious, you can ask him. I'll give him the boon. You can ask him without having to see it. And the blind king said, why not? Maybe that'll come in handy. So Sanjaya got this divine eye. He could see what's happening on the battlefield a few miles away, and also he could see what's happening within the minds of the warriors there. So let's look at what this story means to you and me. Why this vast story, I only kind of scratched the surface of it, is important to us as spiritual seekers. I'm going to fast forward to this chart. There's Gandhari. So we have the blind king. We also have a ruler in us that's blind. We can call the blind king in Sri Patanjali's verbiage, he would maybe can call the blind king Manas. It's a lower part of the mind that doesn't have the intelligence to grasp things. It can take in through the senses, but it can't grasp the meaning of it. And it's run by samskaras, its conditioning. It has no capacity to get out of that wheel, that cycle of its conditioning. And that conditioning is based on dullness and restlessness, tamas and rajas. We can see this part of ourself. And he marries Gandhari. Gandhari can be considered the buddhi, or the intelligence in the person, the intellect. That has some capacity to understand, and it determines where our attention is going to go. If she blindfolds herself and marries the blind king, then the attention is going to move away from the light, move away from consciousness, and get stuck in the patterns. And that's what happens. And the idea that they have 100 children mean they have innumerable vices. Once the blind king and the part of ourselves that can rationalize its blindness, uses intelligence to rationalize, then we get into deeper and deeper trouble. And that's the ego and our self-centered life, represented by Duryodhana and his sibling. And then there's Pandu. His whiteness here represents sattva, or the higher part of the mind. And he marries, one of his wives is Kunti, who has this capacity to connect with subtler forces of nature. You can say she's an intuitive connection. So when the sattvic mind weds with this intuitive connection, it's moved by conscience rather than by conditioning. And it gives birth to virtuous beings, virtuous qualities. That's the other part of ourselves. So we have this higher part, and we have this dull, darker part. One moved by conscience, one moved by samskaras or conditioning. And the blind king and Gandhari have 100 children, and Pandu and Kunti have 5 children. So it's a 20-to-1 ratio. And I think that's significant also, that we'll have 20 self-centered or selfish thoughts. What about me? It's all about me. To 5 virtuous thoughts, connecting us to the whole. Both sides go to Krishna for help, and he does help both sides. He helps the egoistic side through trying to fulfill its material desires, and he helps the spiritual side or the soul side by giving it insight. These 3 terms here, explicate, implicate, and insight intelligence, are terms from the great physicist David Bohm. David Bohm took the idea of quantum mechanics, some of Einstein's work, and took it further. And he said that there are different qualities, different frequencies of energy. The most external form of energy is the weakest form. It's so externalized and it vibrates in a pace where you can actually see it. And he calls that the explicate order, that which is made explicit. When energy and consciousness becomes more subtle, he calls it the implicate order. It's implied. You can't see it anymore, but it's much more powerful. And it gets more and more subtle and more powerful until you hit the source. He called it insight intelligence. He's a scientist. He's not going to call it God. But it's an intelligence. It's not a random energy. The yogis call it the Atman, or the true self. Arjuna represents you and me. And his name means the one who's going to make sincere efforts. He's had enough experience in life to know that he needs to go within. That's where his ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction is going to come. And he's sincere about this. Krishna comes from the root krish, which means to draw. So there's a part of ourselves, the self is putting our consciousness inside, drawing us to that all the time. So you have the sincere effort in Arjuna, and you have Krishna pulling the soul toward it. And there's this quote from Swami Asokananda's book. This battlefield takes place on a place called Kurukshetra. The Kurukshetra battle didn't just happen some thousands of years ago. It is happening constantly. It is within each of us. So this is our story. It's a conflict between the soul and the ego. It's a part that prefers the cover of darkness, the status quo, and the part that's being pulled and drawn toward the light. There's a part of us that's been sent out into exile for so many lifetimes. And at a certain point, it gains enough understanding and strength to try to reclaim its proper place. And that's the story of the Bhagavad Gita. We're going to learn the lessons that Sri Krishna, as Arjuna's charioteer, the higher self guiding the soul, is going to pass on to Arjuna now to help him successfully engage in this battle. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.